We've encountered Jesus this week in a couple of different feasts. I love how John points that out. As I think back over special times with my family growing up, many of them happened during holidays or parties, and I could think back to my birthday party or one of my parents' anniversary. I might remember how we celebrated New Year's Eve and, of course, Christmas. See, in our minds, holidays are milestones. That is true in our culture today, but that was especially true in the culture of biblical Israel. John fast forwards the story from the Passover during springtime to late fall. It is the time of the harvest. If you would have walked around the fields of Israel, you would have noticed that they were filled with grain. On the side of the mountains, grapes filled the vineyards, and in the woods, olive trees were ready to be picked. If you were growing up in Israel, you would have looked forward the most to this time of the year. Now, God, in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, had told Israel how to show their thankfulness for what God had done for them. Every year, sometime at the end of September, beginning of October, they would gather for a solemn assembly, an assembly of thanksgiving. And then the people were to camp out in booths or little huts for 7 days, offering sacrifices and praising God. How amazing is that? They had to do this every year to remember what it was like to travel from Egypt to the Promised Land. And during the travel, they, of course, had no harvest, but now they did. The harvest was not their doing. It was all God's doing. The Feast of Booths helped them to remember that the temporary hardship of journeying to the Promised Land gave way to this permanent blessing of land that led to harvest each and every year. Now, many families came to Jerusalem for this feast from all over Israel. They would camp in big groups of people outside the city at night in these booths, and once morning came, all of them would enter into the city for celebrations. And in the beginning of John 7, we see that Jesus' brothers and his sisters up in Galilee ask if Jesus will join them for their family celebration at the Feast of Booths in Jerusalem. Jesus says, "No, I'm staying in Galilee," which most likely would have frustrated them. But we want to answer the question, why would he do that? Well, we find the answer in John chapter 7, verse 1. We read that the Jews are planning to kill Jesus. We don't know how or exactly when, but the Jewish leaders hated Jesus so much that by now they were planning to kill Jesus when he got to Jerusalem for the Feast of Booths. Now, Jesus knows that they will go to Jerusalem one day and that he will be there and that he will be killed on a cross, but just not yet. And so his family leaves. Jesus maybe waves them off, but Jesus is not done yet. It is true he will not go with them to the capital city for this feast, but instead he will go by himself. He'll travel in secret. Now this passage is just complicated. Did Jesus lie? Well, no. Did he change his mind about going to Jerusalem? Probably not either. Or could he just have made sure that the Jews did not kill him? So many questions, and the bottom line is this. Jesus loved the people enough to travel to Jerusalem instead of staying in the safety of Galilee. After Jesus arrives, he goes straight to the temple. The crowds listening to him are amazed, and there are many people that believe that he's the Messiah. Well, I imagine a bomb went off in the high priest's office. He would have been so angry. What they must have said, Jesus has the nerve to show up right here in our temple. They are committed now to killing him during the priest. And so they send the temple guard to arrest him. These temple guards read about in John chapter 7 are probably highly trained Levites who function as the temple police and stood under the direct command of the high priest. So through the streets of Jerusalem race these temple guards to arrest Jesus and bring him to certain death. Now, John does not give us the juicy details of how Jesus escaped the clutches of the high priest guard. All John records is how Jesus responds to the situation. John writes in chapter 7, verse 33, "I will be with you for a little longer, and then I'm going to him who sent me. You will seek me, and you will not be able to find me. Where I am, you cannot come." Now the crowds are puzzled as Jesus says this to the temple police that is coming to arrest him. Now we know that Jesus, of course, was talking about where he would go after his death and resurrection. When he returned to the Father in heaven at the ascension, there will be no more possibility to arrest him. Why? Well, not only because he was out of the temple guard's physical reach, but also because he was going to be ruling and reigning as the ultimate king, looking down from heaven at these puny little religious leaders. But why would John explain all of this in the context of the Feast of Booths, or the feast with these huts? Well, it's because Jesus' ministry was temporary. After 3 years of working, he would leave this earth. And for those that believed in Jesus, it would give way to a permanent relationship with God filled with joy. The religious leaders believed that their way of leading was permanent, but they couldn't have been further from the truth. Although they would one day kill Jesus, they would never stop him. The Feast of Heaven, though, remembering what God had brought out through the spiritual desert, would last forever. The priest responded with anger and frustration, even trying to kill Jesus. But many of Jesus' followers, and I hope you and I would be counted in with that, respond again with thankfulness for what Jesus has done and for God's ongoing plan of moving us from the kingdom of sin and darkness through the cross of Jesus to the kingdom of his life, which marks a life that begins now and lasts for eternity.